Hey everyone, welcome back to an SFI Biweekly briefing on Tuesdays at 2. I'm Sarah Streeter, SFI's Executive Director, and today I'm lucky to have a special guest whom I will bring on in just 1 minute. But before I do, one quick top-line update since our last briefing. We've been talking a lot about the annual defense bill that is currently being negotiated on Capitol Hill right now, and I just want to let everyone know where it's at. Last week, the House of Representatives passed its version of the bill. It includes some important provisions related to Afghanistan and the National Guard, which we are going to flesh out in our next briefing. Unfortunately, this bill does not include some of our other SFI priorities that we've been talking a lot about lately, including repealing the Iraq War Authorization or reforming the 1033 program, which we will focus on that issue in just a second. But real quickly, the Senate has also advanced its version of its annual defense bill out of committee, waiting for there to be action on the floor. We are monitoring a couple possible voting related amendments in that process, but it's not likely to be nearly as busy as it was when it was in the House. And once the Senate passed its version of the bill, there's a step in this legislative process called conference, terminology alert, when both chambers of Congress delegate members to meet and decide which components of each of their different versions of the bill get included in whatever the final version is that they send to the president. So just as a recap, House has passed, Senate still considering. The main next step that we're going to focus on is that conference step. Okay, so with that snapshot behind us, today is a deep dive episode of our briefings where we're going to focus on a top issue that's a big priority for us here at SFI, and that is the Department of Defense's 1033 program. I have invited a distinguished guest to help me tick through what it is, why it's important, and what our next steps of advocacy look like, and that is Yasmine Taeb. She's a civil rights lawyer who currently leads a coalition of diverse organizations, including SFI, that are working to demilitarize law enforcement. Hi, Yasmine, and welcome.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me.
So Yasmine, most of our members are familiar, of course, with what the 1033 program is, because we talk about it a lot, but there may be some new listeners who are tuning in. So let's very quickly start with a brief high-level summary of what the 1033 is and how it contributes to the militarization of our communities.
Sure. So the 1033 program is one of the kind of main leading programs that has led to the militarization of local police. It's since its inception in the mid-1990s, more than $7.4 billion in equipment have been transferred to over 8,000 law enforcement agencies across the country. And this includes, anything from assault rifles, semi-automatics, MRAPs, Humvees, aircraft, grenade launchers, etc. So this, as you know, Sarah, advocates have been really in earnest working to rein in this program since 2014, when it became in national attention after the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson.
Yeah, and an additional resurgence of attention and focus on the program just last year, as a lot of us were seeing images that we weren't accustomed to seeing very often. So great. No, that's a great overview. And Yasmine, I think it's really unique having you here because you lead a coalition that has a lot of different groups in it with a lot of different approaches to how they respond to the existence and the functioning of this 1033 program. There are some folks that think the best thing to do is get rid of the program altogether, while others think that a more feasible strategy might be to reform the program to get the worst parts away. And I was hoping that you could just take a second to reflect on the various different harms that have stemmed from this program, and which of those harms do you see as being mitigatable through reform versus what are some of the harms that feel pretty inherent to the program, no matter kind of how it looks?
Sure. So as you know, Sarah, the vast majority of the community, particularly since George Floyd's murder last year, came out in support of completely ending and repealing this program, right? So there is numerous efforts, the legislation by Representative Velasquez that was introduced last year and reintroduced this year, that more than 150 organizations representing tens of millions of their members across the country signed on to and support. So there are certain organizations that have taken a very strong repeal-only position, and I understand, right, that concern. These are organizations that feel as though this program, from its inception, has traumatized communities of color, and they want nothing to do with this program, and they want this program gone completely. And again, those concerns are very valid. Unfortunately, as you know, this program, in addition to the military equipment that is being transferred to law enforcement agencies, the program also, the vast majority of the equipment actually that gets transferred to law enforcement agencies is non-military equipment. So it's desks and computers and night vision goggles and various types of equipments that police departments, particularly in kind of rural districts, can't afford to get. So they get through this program. So that's been really, I would say, one of the main challenges for advocates in trying to either reform or rein in or shut down this program, is because those are the arguments that we get from members of Congress, is that, well, the police departments in my district rely on this. They can't afford to get this equipment on their own. And so what I've been trying to do is I think that I do believe that reform is a path to repeal. So I do think that we need to first work to rein in this program. And this means trying to end the transfer of all the military equipment and vehicles to law enforcement agencies, and putting very kind of strong oversight and accounting provisions in any sort of legislative package or provision that passes on this program. And then we can work to eventually end this program and have the non-military equipment get transferred through some other entity.
I'm glad you mentioned also, in addition to reforming what type of equipment we want to not be transferred anymore, in provisions like accountability and training even. The program as it stands doesn't require the military to offer training to use this military weaponry. It's on the police stations to find the training themselves. And yeah, it's easier to lose track once the equipment gets passed on. So there are lots of little, seemingly obvious and commonsensical ways in which there's room for improvement. So I'm glad you mentioned those. And Yasmine, I mean, you're someone who, you're extremely bright and talented and competent, and you've done a lot throughout your career and focused on a lot of different issues. And so I was curious if you could reflect, kind of just a note of personalness, why it is that you decided that tackling the 1033 program and the DoD, which we all acknowledge is kind of wonky sounding. What is it that made it such an important priority for you to focus your energies on this year?
No, absolutely. And that's a great question. So I, traditionally throughout my professional career, I've worked on a series of foreign policy issues and in trying to advance a more progressive foreign policy, and one that prioritizes diplomacy over militarism. And throughout the years, it's very clear that a more militarized U.S. foreign policies, unfortunately, has led to more militarism here at home, right? So when we're even talking about winding down from various military engagements, there's numerous studies and analysis that have been done by Brown University's Cost of War Project and a number of other partners that show that immediately after military drawdowns, the equipment that comes back, right, the military equipment that comes back from those engagements goes straight into the 1033 pipeline and further militarizes our communities here at home. So for me, after George Floyd was murdered last year, that's when kind of the passion was reignited again, when I saw the military equipment, that the MRAPs, the aircraft, the grenade launchers being used to launch tear gas, right, at just residents and community members exercising their First Amendment rights. for me, it was incredibly difficult to see that continue to happen throughout the past several years, knowing full well that nothing had changed, right, in terms of this program being reined in since Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. And it's incredibly disheartening, incredibly disappointing. And, I do think it's partly because, as you've noted, Sarah, this program, it like 1033 part sounds really wonky, and it's authorized through this bill, the NDAA, right, through the Pentagon. So racial justice advocates, they don't focus on the NDAA. They have other avenues, other kind of legislative vehicles that they generally focus on. So for someone who's been working on NDAA advocacy, that's honestly one of also the main reasons I wanted to help. And I worked to kind of bridge that gap and bring the community together, making sure we brought the racial justice groups, the faith and peace and justice organizations, anti-war groups together to be able to advocate effectively on this issue.
And effectively, you've done a fantastic job. And I really love that a lot, because I think as an organization, our journey has been kind of analogous, where we were focused on very much the foreign policy, peace and security space. And last year was this reality check of, it's a lot bigger. There are a lot of other issues that are even domestic facing. And you mentioned last June, you've heard me talk about this in congressional meetings we've had together, Yasmine, but the Lafayette Park, now Black Lives Matter Plaza, showdown between domestic law enforcement and civilians. But it wasn't clear at first that it was domestic law enforcement because of how militarized their setup was. There was a lot of uncertainty as to whether those were active duty troops. And that is something that I think really struck at the core for a lot of military spouses and family members. Like, we did not want our families and the institution that we've kind of served in to be caught up in this mess and be a tool of harm. And that's the kind of confusion that happened. So that's a big motivation for why we and many of our advocates have joined the fight. So all right, well, to get a little wonky for just a second, I did share at the top about how, unfortunately, in the House NDA side, there has no amendment that would either reform or repeal the 1033 program ultimately got added to the bill, which of course was a huge disappointment to our group. So what do you see now as the path forward? What is the next legislative or non-legislative vehicle that you've set your eyes on?
Sure. I think at this point, Sarah, we need to do everything we possibly can to make it clear to the administration to act an issue of strong executive program. So, our ask with the White House has generally been, we would like them to issue a moratorium to end the transfer of all military equipment and vehicles to law enforcement agencies, and hoping that, with that, the White House could signal to Congress that they want this program to be ultimately shut down. As you know, the administration was supposed to issue an executive order on this program back in January, and the executive order was kind of mirrored very closely to the executive order that the Obama administration issued in 2015. And that's honestly not what we're looking for, right? We thought those reforms were pretty modest, and they really had very little impact in terms of demilitarizing our communities. And we're hoping for something much, much stronger. So the pressure right now is trying to get the White House to issue an executive order on this program, particularly since, as you know, unfortunately, the Georgia Justice and Policing Act, also the negotiations closed with unfortunately no deal.
Great. So we've got a new kind of area to focus our energies. And so just to close real quickly, Yasmine, we like to end every briefing by offering kind of a concrete action step that members who have joined the briefing can take, hopefully inspired by everything that they've heard today. I know that some of our partner organizations have organized petitions, for example, that in general have a lot of signatures, and the more signatures they get, the more urgent the administration can see, like, oh, this is an issue that people care about. Is that a great action step? Are there any other things that we should offer?
No, absolutely. And there's a petition that Daily Kos is hosting for the community. I believe right now it has at least 55,000 signatures. We'd love to get it to 100,000, and we generally send that off to the White House directly. And you're right, that the more signatures they see on these petitions, the more they understand that this issue continues to be a priority for the community.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Yasmine, for taking the time to join us. And thank you to everyone for tuning in and taking a few minutes out of your day to maybe learn about something new or deepen your knowledge of an existing topic. We will definitely post the link to the petition that Yasmine just mentioned in the comments when this airs. And yes, hopefully everyone will tune back in 2 more weeks for our next biweekly briefing. And in the meantime, take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.